And then you get around to AI, which is a source of demand for sure, but we see AI as only maybe 30% of data center demand this year. It's not, as some of the headlines suggest, 70, 80, 100% of data center demand.
Certainly because of the scale of the projects, it gets a lot of the headlines, but we would agree with you. It is a big driver. It is not the only driver. Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Not Your Father's Data Center. I am Raymond Hawkins, Chief Customer Officer with Compass Datacenters. I work out of our Dallas headquarters or our remote office in Auburn, Alabama. That office contains a grand total of 1 employee. Today, we are joined from the great state of Illinois and the wonderful city of Chicago with JLL's Head of Data Center Research, Andrew Batson. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Raymond, great to be here.
As all of you might imagine, when we've got one of our friends from JLL here to talk about the way the market looks, we will spend most of today talking about what's going on in the demand curve, what it looks like, where the demand is, what's driving the demand, and what challenges are coming from that. All of the folks that listen to us are pretty well dialed into the data center space and are aware of the unbelievable hockey stick in demand in our space. But before we get into all of that, we'd love to hear, Andrew, how you got to JLL. Go back as far as you would like. If you want to talk to us about your days at Cleveland State or even earlier, but feel free. But we'd love to hear a little bit about you and what brought you into the data center business before we launch into what's driving demand these days.
Yeah, happy to, Raymond. So born and raised in suburban Detroit. Small town called Berkeley, about 15 miles north of downtown Detroit. Stayed there through undergrad, went to a business college called Oakland University. Every once in a while makes it into March Madness. It's might be the claim.
So every once in a while Oakland sneaks into the tournament. Yeah. So all things Detroit, I mean, are we Lions,
Tigers, Red Wings in particular? I feel like
Red Wings, okay. Red Wings top of the list.
Yeah, myself, like I think most kids growing up in Detroit, hockey is almost a must.
Right.
It's hockey and then every other sport. So I grew up spending a lot of time running around the Midwest into Ontario for hockey tournaments during the winter. And that was fun. That was a fun period of my life.
So I'm only going to guess, but so the Red Wings, Fedorov, yeah. He would have been big in your childhood when he had been a formative player.
And this is a blast from the past, but Steve Yzerman was the captain.
Yzerman, yeah, okay.
So they had a nice run when I was growing up. They had a handful of Stanley Cups during that period, and they've struggled a little bit lately. I'm not as close to it these days, but I mean
Detroit, you can't have it all. The Lions have come around.
That's right.
And I mean, so Francis and I both worked for a now retired, long-suffering Detroit Lions fan, in Steve Flagg, who was the original head of marketing here at Compass. And you want to talk about just a permanent Detroit Lions poo-pooer, right? And now Goff and what's the coach's name? I love him, the big former tight end.
Name's escaping me, but yes,
Dan something. He's exciting. So anyway, I'm happy for you guys up there that the Lions have made it into the playoffs. Still no Super Bowl, but certainly optimistic about the Lions' future.
Yeah, and so Netflix has a series called Quarterback, and they feature Goff in the current season. I'm not as close to the Lions either. I've been away from Detroit for close to 20 years now, but it's been exciting from a distance to watch the team rebuild, and I've been watching the Quarterback series. It's interesting to get kind of an inside view. Yeah,
that's a good one. Have you adopted any Chicago clubs?
It's difficult. I got to tell you, Raymond, the Bears aren't a whole lot to get excited about, unfortunately. I've gone to my fair share of Cubs games.
That's an experience.
Yeah, that's an experience.
Love Wrigley.
Yeah,
Wrigleyville's awesome.
Beautiful. One of the few remaining Fenway. Again, love just the classic architecture.
The romance of those old parks, just when you realize, hey, it's so much different than the facilities we build today. The walk up into Wrigley, you go up into the field, the steps are so tiny, and the ballpark's just very classic. Love Wrigley.
Yeah.
And it's in the middle of a neighborhood, too. That I love.
Yeah, the parking always gets me. So when I moved, we'll get to Chicago, but when I moved here, I lived downtown for 2 years in River North.
Okay.
So when I was going to the Cubs games, I just took the elevated rail line up.
Yeah.
But it always kind of amazed me. How are people parking and getting, from the suburbs to the stadium?
Yeah. Crazy look and feel around that ballpark for sure.
Yeah.
All right, we sidetracked you because you got me going with Detroit. You had got me thinking about my dear friend Steve Flagg and the Lions. Let's get back. So you went to school at Oakland U.
Yeah.
Grew up in Detroit. Let's go from there.
Yeah. So I had a couple of formative relationships throughout undergrad, and I was thinking urban planning, economic development. And at that time, Cleveland State University had a very renowned program in planning, as well as commercial real estate development and finance. So I moved to Cleveland for graduate school. This was around end of 08, 09. So even if I wanted to jump right into the labor market, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity out there.
Some bad things were going on right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed like a good time to stick in school for a couple more years.
Yeah. Especially if you wanted to get in the real estate business.
Yes. But that worked out well. I landed a graduate assistantship. Tuition was paid. I had a stipend on the side and, built up my network and learned more about, economic development and commercial real estate finance and all of that. And through that process, I had made some connections at JLL. And around the time I was graduating, I emailed a friend at JLL and was like, I'm graduating. Do you have anything? And they happened to have at that time what was the first research analyst position at their Cleveland, Ohio office. And, as luck has it, I jumped right into that. And
as they say, the rest is history.
As they say, the rest is history. Yeah.
The rest is history. Yeah.
Yeah, that was 2010, 2011. Commercial real estate market was on the upswing following the great financial crisis.
Starting to bounce back after 08, 09. Yeah, that's right. So
at that time, I was covering predominantly office and industrial real estate. And JLL, it was in the early years of JLL investing in analytics and data and their platform. So over the course of a number of years, I went from one research analyst covering the Great Lakes to a team of maybe a dozen. And then my geography expanded to include Midwestern states and from there. And so for a number of years, I think close to maybe a dozen years or so, I was leading our Midwest research team covering predominantly office and industrial real estate.
Gotcha. Okay. So the kind of cool that you didn't start in the data center business. You started in the real estate side of the business. You started in, frankly, probably the biggest part of JLL's business, office and industrial, and grew up in that space. That's pretty cool. All right. How did you get to be, so fast forward, you're covering the Midwest, you're covering office, industrial, keep going. Where did data center come up? And I'd love to hear it, and I'm not asking for trade secrets. Did you guys start on Salesforce with your analytics and tools, or what were you using in the early days?
Yeah, way back when. It was Excel when I first started, and then we moved into the cloud a few years after I joined. And iterations over time, but now we've got a pretty solid cloud-based analytics program.
Gotcha.
We store our data and run most of the analytics.
Got it.
Yeah. So how I got from there to here, there was this little thing called the pandemic. And, I mean, that shook up a lot of things.
You got some highlights, 08 and 2020. Yeah. You got some highlights in your career.
I do.
That's right.
Yes. You could see the end of the tunnel, if you will. There was an opportunity to support our national property management team, which at that time was going very strong. The pandemic required a lot of property management assistance.
Yeah.
So I moved to Chicago and was supporting our national property management group, did that for a period of time. But then data centers, just over the course of all of those years was growing. And JLL's continued to invest resources, including additional kind of analytics support. There was opportunity presented to me to join our national data center team. And I jumped at that. And that was about 2 years ago now. So 2025, that would have been around the end of 23.
All right. Well, you jumped in when the water was already warm and getting warmer.
I thought I was late to the party for sure. And it amazes me.
Yeah. Isn't it incredible? I mean, I'm going to give one story I'm sure I have told before on the podcast, but, spending time with customers out on the West Coast and talking about, hey, we've doubled capacity from 22 to 23. We've doubled again from 23 to 24. There's no way we're going to double again. And talking about absorption across the globe in the data center space. And one particular customer laughed at me and said, Raymond, we'll double the absorption just our demand. And we've seen that. Or I mean, I kind of thought he was stretching it when he said it, and boy, we've seen that. I think I saw a note 7.5 or 8 gigawatts in something that you guys produced. I mean, the numbers are staggering. It's shocking how much. And like you said, kind of thought we were at the tail end in 22 or 23. It is. Where the future is bright for our business, for our industry, and man, there's lots of reasons why. So let's get in and talk about some of those. Tell me a little bit, since it's fresh off the presses. You got some things you'd like to highlight out of your first half data center report? We'd love to hear some of that if you're willing.
So our North American data center report, fresh out beginning of this week. So as we were talking about in the lead up to this conversation, most of the trend lines remain intact in terms of supply, demand, and the like, which to a certain extent is a story in itself. And I highlight this in my narrative. If we think back to the beginning of the year, we had DeepSeek, number of headlines about hyperscalers potentially walking away from leases. And then we had the Liberation Day and all the impact for that. So, I mean, my calendar was just jam-packed the first few months of the year, just answering questions and, talking with investors about what all that meant for the sector, and if that had any impact on our forecasts for the industry, which we forecast out fairly confidently to 2030. So we can jump into that in a bit. But generally speaking, trend lines remain intact. Vacancy for colocation in North America dipped down just say 10 basis points to 2.3%. I've been taking this tone the last couple of reports that from an investment perspective, it's quite nice and healthy to have a fully leased portfolio of assets generating income. But if we think about the industry more broadly, having vacancy at such a restrictive rate is actually counterproductive.
Right, because if you think of vacancy as inventory, like another industry might think of it, the fact that we have, 2% is, think about comparing this to a residential real estate business. We have a couple of months of inventory. That's it, right? And in that regard, there's very little elasticity. Yep. Very hard to respond to demand when you're running at 2% vacancy.
Yeah, I like the analogy to the housing market for sure. Okay, so a couple other interesting points. Pre-leasing, again, came in north of 70%. This time around,
which is staggering.
73% of all the product that's under construction.
So Andrew, take 2 minutes. So you and I both know what that pre-leasing. Will you go back and walk somebody who's never thought about the data center real estate business, what that means to be 73% pre-leased? Just explain that to people that are just listening and going, hey, this data center thing is interesting. I'm going to listen for the first time.
Yep. Okay. So across North America, we're tracking around 8 gigawatts of co-location capacity that is under construction. Okay. Of that product that's under construction capacity, you can think about back to the home analogy.
Yep.
78% of those homes are already purchased, or in this case, the co-location space, 78% of that capacity has already been accounted for, has already been encumbered by some company who's likely not going to occupy that space for a year or two. But the market is so tight, they're having to just stretch out their timelines just to secure space in the future.
Right. So we'll keep it, because you're a Chicago guy, we'll keep it as a Chicago. So someone's built a high rise in downtown Chicago, condos for sale. There's 1,000 units. Before they broke ground, 800 of the units were sold.
Yep. Perfect analogy.
Just to put that in a normal, person's, mind around real estate, that's incredible. 800 of the 1,000 units pre-sold. And that's not one building in Chicago. That's the data center construction business across North America. Almost 80% of it pre-leased.
We just kind of roll off the tongue, 8 gigawatts under construction, but that is a lot of product.
That is an unbelievable amount of capacity. All right, so that's a huge headline. 78% of it pre-leased. The 2% vacancy, huge headline number. What other fascinating statistics you got?
Yeah, we had about 2.5 gigawatts of absorption in the first half of the year, which puts us at a target of about 5 gigawatts of absorption for co-location this year.
Now, how are you scoring absorption? Are you scoring signature, or are you scoring move-in? What are you scoring
signature
as absorption?
Yeah, which is comparable to what our competitors, our friends are doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and so we hone in on this because we get questions on it. We hone in on this in the report. With vacancy so low, almost all of the pre-leasing is absorption. Or vice versa, all the absorption is pre-leasing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we're scoring it the same way. Or we're thinking about it the same way.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So then other kind of key themes, the majority of co-location demand remains in primary markets. I don't remember what our final number was, but 70-80% of demand was in kind of the core 6 or 7 markets that you would think of across the U.S.
Can we run through them real quick? Just you and I probably can do them off the top of our head, but for folks that don't know, I mean, clearly Loudoun County, clearly Dallas, clearly Phoenix. Those 3 are hands down winners. Who would you? Atlanta
for sure.
In that top 5.
Dallas, Pacific Northwest, and you might have mentioned
Pac
Chicago.
Northwest. Yeah, I did not mention Chicago, Pacific Northwest. Okay.
Yeah.
So Dallas, Phoenix, Loudoun County, Atlanta, Pacific Northwest, and Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Those 6 are kind of where we're seeing everything happen, right?
Yeah. So I try to differentiate that from this because that's not to say that there is a lot of hyperscale development in secondary, tertiary markets. What we try to do is draw a distinction within the co-location space that the primary demand there remains in core markets. In fact, 50% of the absorption in the first half of 2025, 50% was either in Northern Virginia or Dallas. Those 2 markets accounted for half of all the signings.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Did Phoenix or Chicago come in third? Or maybe Atlanta, but I would think it would be Phoenix or Chicago.
Yeah, I'd have to look,
Atlanta.
but one of the 2 for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Chicago has a lot of product under. Phoenix as well remains very strong. Yeah. Atlanta's got a lot of product under construction as well. So
now you say Pac Northwest. Are you counting, is that mostly Oregon, or are you counting some of Eastern Washington in that number?
Washington and Oregon. Yeah, those 2
Oregon,
states.
Okay, both. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we've got about 1 gigawatt that we're tracking there for colo existing in place.
How you started to go down this path? How are you seeing this? I don't know if we call it secondary or if we call it tier 3 or if we call it tertiary, but how are you tracking the northern Wisconsin, the Wyoming, the Mississippi, the Louisiana? How are you tracking those hyperscale, largely driven campuses? How are you guys seeing that market?
Yeah, great question. So a couple thoughts there. One, you know this, markets are just what we define as a market just continues to expand, right? The geography that we consider, for instance, the Chicago data center market just continues to grow. You've got spillover into Northwest Indiana and into
Southern Wisconsin.
Yeah. So, and that's part of the story. What we report on in our North American report are the top 20 markets, which accounts for something like, 90% of all co-location capacity in the U.S. But we are tracking additional kind of tertiary markets. Let's go with that across the U.S. where there is co-location. Let's go product. And then you had mentioned Mississippi. Then there's the whole separate conversation about hyperscale product.
Right. Yeah, I'd be interested in how you guys look at and score. And I'm going to pick on somebody. Let's pick on the former Secretary of Agriculture in Texas, the former governor, who I'm drawing a blank on his name. He announces an 11 gig project in the panhandle of Texas. How does that get viewed in your report? Because it's not, to your point, it's not really colo yet. It's also not a hyperscaler yet, but it's somebody saying, "Hey, I'm going to do 11 gigs over there." I'm sure you're visible to it, but how do you score that in your report?
Yeah, and there's almost fatigue on the headlines every day, every week with gigawatt developments across the U.S. So we report out a pipeline of co-location products that we see as feasibly breaking ground in some phase over the next 3 to 5 years. So our pipeline for co-location product in North America is around 30 gigawatts.
I do like the phrase headline fatigue because I feel like every third day I've heard about another gigawatt project somewhere. Yeah.
And then what's under construction would just be the current phase, right? Because most of these, hundreds of gigawatts projects, as you know, is what you're doing over at Compass. Yeah. It's all phased product. Yeah. And then
3-4 phases before I get there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then additionally, I'd add this. It's what we view as likely development activity. Back to that just idea of fatigue and the headlines everywhere. In fact, we touch on this in our commentary around power. Some of the additional regulations and kind of protocols that the different utilities have put in place in terms of applying for power, we see as actually quite beneficial in the grand scheme of our industry and development activity because it's reducing a lot of noise and it's sifting out some of the just pure speculative projects, and then clearing a pathway for groups like Compass to accelerate viable development activity.
So take a couple of minutes on that. So you and I lived through it. I'm going to, spend some time with our energy friends, gone to some EPRI conferences, spent a lot of time at the generator side. One executive told me at a conference, he said, Raymond, if every data center demand project, that we've been asked about was real, we'd be building, something, I don't remember, it was some ridiculous number, 80 or 90 gigawatts in North America right now. So there's, to your point, lots of noise, lots of headline fatigue, lots of people speculating, let me get in line with the generation group because I think I might someday buy some land that could lead to a data center. But so talk through a little bit. You said you think it's healthy. What have you guys seen? How do you see it maturing? How do you see it helping the industry? I think that is a very interesting take. So let's dig into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, happy to. So, as you're aware, there's been a significant increase in deposits for power applications within the last 12 months. A number of utilities are up and north of $1 million. Now, those funds will be applied to the project cost. If it goes through, the rest would be refundable if the project proceeds. And then minimum payments, right? So if you're requesting 100 gigawatts, they're going to deliver the power in X number of years, but then you're on the hook to pay, call it 75% of that request on an ongoing basis. So we think that generally, as I mentioned, that's helpful in reducing a lot of the speculation from the system. And that's not to say that land development has become, a valuable component of the development value chain. But there are some groups that are encumbering space and doing the work so that if, for instance, a Compass wanted to come in and move quickly in a particular market, there is some land that could be moved on pretty quickly. So there is some value there, and I understand the incentive for groups to pursue that, but it's also creating some gridlock in the system.
Yeah. I'm grateful to hear your 75% number. That's what we hear most of our projects is the power companies want us to commit to between 70 and 80% of the power. I do think that there's a little bit of yin and yang there. First of all, I love that you don't show up here and ask for something if you're not serious. I'm not sure 80% is the right number because all of my customers have a load ramp. They have time to deploy, but it does allow us to go. The 80% number doesn't scare us as a real developer, but it does get us to the table and go, okay, what makes sense? When are we going to get to 80? We might not get to 80 for 4 years, but it's okay. Let's talk about it. It does scare off people that aren't really in the business, that are really just speculating.
Yep.
So love hearing that you're hearing that number between 70 and 80. That's real. And yes, you mentioned $1 million. I would say 7 and 8 figure upfronts are not unusual asks now where they were 2 years ago.
Yeah, a couple other interesting points. Price costs, right? So just the cost of electricity that's getting delivered to data centers. We're quoting electricity rates in co-location facilities in the markets that we track. So this is not just a Google of commercial power. But we have electricity rates up 30% in the last 5 years, which, 30%. I mean, a lot of the numbers in our industry are moving quickly, but that follows a decade where they were flat.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's not a material move compared to everything else in our business going up. All the raw material, all the equipment costs, land costs, are all up more than 30%.
Yeah. When I joined our data center group early on, there was a lot of conversation about behind the meter and bridge power, and particularly in the behind the meter, particularly in Dallas and Texas more generally. We're seeing a number of projects that are moving forward with behind the meter natural gas turbines as the primary source, not just as a 3, 6, 12-month bridge solution. And I think that's been a meaningful development over the last year or so. I mean, we could rifle off easily probably a dozen projects where that's the mode of transportation, if you will. And
you're saying you're seeing that beyond bridge. I know you mentioned 3 to 6 months. We see a lot of bridge power that are 2 or 3 years long to get to what you need from a utility. You're seeing people do long-term turbine natural gas. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. What's your take on the behind the meter? Because we hear two sides of the behind the meter argument. Hey, you're taking from the grid, you're not helping the grid. I can see that argument. I understand why that gets said. hey, you're helping the grid by you're doing your own stand up, and you don't need to. In other words, if you took generation that was already on the grid and then you moved it behind the meter, hey, that's bad. Hey, you built your own generation and you just started from behind the meter, hey, that's neutral. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think about, maybe from a PR perspective, behind the meter projects.
Yeah, I would agree with your statements that if you're talking about a power generation asset that was on the grid and now that you're taking some of that capacity off, like we saw in Pennsylvania with one of our hyperscaler friends. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of questions from the public on that. Now, if you want to build something self-generation that was never on the grid, and then, hey, you might actually sell some of that power back to the grid in challenging times, then I think that's a positive for all groups involved.
Yeah, I'm interested. Have you guys? You mentioned the gas turbine play. Have you guys got any view on microgrids and especially in Phoenix? There's or in APS territory, there's microgrid activity going on. Love to hear your thoughts around the microgrid.
Are you speaking like in terms of solar or just okay?
So in anybody's microgrid. So whether you do it with nat gas, whether you do it with solar, whether you do it with diesel, in one of our projects, we've been specifically asked, hey, stand up a grid for peak loading. We need to do load shifting at times, and we want to know that if we call and ask, hey, we're going to take you off the grid and that you can handle the generation. It's not behind the meter. It's the utility asking us, hey, can you help? Yes. When it gets really bad, when it gets really hot, could you do your own generation?
Yeah, I think we'll see that in increasing frequency from the larger groups like a Compass and the others. And I think, again, it's a benefit to all parties involved.
I think it's a big collaboration conversation. Hey, are you communicating with the utility? Are you talking about the grid? Are you doing things to strengthen the grid? Are you doing things to help? Not just with generation, but with distribution and transmission. If you're helping the utility, I think we can be a net win for the rate carrier, for the rate payer. But you got to. It's back to your comment about how big a developer are you collaborating and helping the grid, or are you just trying to win a deal on your own piece of dirt? I think that's a big separation point for developers. We are trying hard to be a good neighbor, not just in how we build and how we manage the facility, but how we collaborate around the utility. And I think, as an industry, we got to be careful about that because our numbers are so big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was on a call earlier with a journalist asking about if we're in a bubble, and it was particular with AI, but it also asked just more generally our industry. And I think it's healthy for folks to ask those questions and for us to kind of think through it. But some of the power challenges that we're experiencing are also quite positive in the fact that it is limiting or putting a governor on a potential scenario where, as an industry, we overbuild, and then there's some disruption to the investment fundamentals.
Yeah. All right. So we talked a good bit about power. You mentioned being able to predict demand or be able to see demand out to 2030. I get asked this in every analyst call. Aren't you worried that the demand is going to go away? AI's over. You've already built all the demand for AI. What other drivers are out there, Raymond? I love from your view, Andrew, what things do you think are fueling demand as you talk about 2030, 5 years from now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So generally speaking, we see both a supply and demand pipeline supporting around a 20% CAGR on colo and hyper development into 2030. The pipeline on supply side is there, as we've talked about with the headlines. On the demand side, a lot of folks will talk about AI. What we try to recenter the conversation around is that AI is only one source of demand in a much broader pool of activity that we see. So if we think about data creation and data storage, just a fundamental driver of data centers for decades, both data creation and data storage has been growing at north of a 20% CAGR for decades. And we, as a society, are only storing like less than 10% of all the data we create, we're actually storing. And most of that's rewritten within 6 months or a year anyway. Other fundamental drivers, if you think of just about internet traffic, also growing north of a 20% CAGR. We have developing countries. And all of that's passing through at least one data center. And then you get around to AI, which is it's a source of demand for sure. But we see AI as only maybe 30% of data center demand this year. It's not as some of the headlines suggest, 70, 80, 100% of data center demand. So we try to recenter the conversation there when it comes up.
I think that's a healthier view. Certainly because of the scale of the projects, it gets a lot of the headlines, but we would agree with you. It is a big driver. It is not the only driver. And the other answer I try to give one that I think is, meaningful out. We don't know what AI is going to be yet. We know it's going to be big. We know it's going to be things, but there's not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of commercially viable AI solutions changing the world yet. It's coming. It's coming rapidly, and we don't know what AI is going to be. So there's lots of AI runway for demand. And then right on the heels of AI, I think of robotics is coming, right? And that is going to be a meaningful driver. I think it's going to be, I'm old enough that I remember we used to talk about the killer applications driving the demand cycle around PCs. I think robotics is going to be another killer application to drive the demand cycle around data centers, drive the demand cycle around AI, because those things are all going to run off of, AI engines, right? You're not going to sit there with a paddle and control your robot. It's going to do it all himself. And then I think after that, quantum computing continues to race towards us as another driver of changing the way we compute altogether. So when I look at being in the data center business, I love your ones and zeros, right? No, we're not deleting a bunch of storage. We're not deleting a bunch of data. The data proliferation's out of control. AI's still got an incredible business cycle maturity to be real. And then I think soon on that heels is robotics and quantum computing. So I'm hopeful that there's demand for data centers for the rest of my professional life. We'll see. But I think 2030 is a good number for me.
There you go. The robots is interesting. So I'm actually working on something, humanoid AI robots. That's roughly the working title. And we're recording this end of August. There's been a lot of headlines, even the last week or two. Wall Street Journal.
Even the last day or two. Yeah.
Bloomberg. Yeah, it's all over the place. So I think that is a huge driver. And AI plays a large component of that.
To give some indication of how big a nerd I am, I watch CNBC. And unfortunately, when the U.S. business cycle goes down, I turn on CNBC International, which is largely an Asian platform. And I was watching the news 2 nights ago all about the Chinese humanoid robot Olympics.
Yep.
So they hosted a whole Olympics in China, and they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Asian companies competing in all these different tasks with humanoid robots. It is fascinating what's coming and how fast it is developing. There is cool stuff coming.
Yeah.
Hopefully not Will Smith iRobot versions, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. So in my hometown of Detroit, robots have been around in industrial buildings and manufacturing facilities for years.
Yeah.
You're right. But this humanoid robot evolution, if you will, is kind of the new frontier. So here's an interesting fact, because I've started doing some research on this paper. The going rate for some of these robots is like $250,000. But then if you take that cost 24 hours a day over the lifespan of the robot, you can get down to like $12 an hour for these things. But the leading groups that are developing this humanoid robot space think they can get that cost down to like $3-4 an hour. So then it becomes quite compelling. And we're not saying that, at least from what I've read, that humanoid robots replace all of us, but they can become a mix within the workforce, similar to car manufacturing. They do certain components, if you will.
Well, AI has got people concerned about what's going to happen to the workforce. Humanoid robots are certainly going to do that. I am bullish on the human spirit. I'm bullish on human ingenuity. The world was terrified at the Industrial Revolution, and it has done nothing but improve the standard of living and raise people out of poverty and extend our life expectancy. I expect the same out of this AI revolution. We're behind from a law's perspective, but we're always behind from a law's perspective. We'll figure it out. But it is exciting about what it's doing for our industry, exciting about what it's doing for your business. I'm just a little bit surprised to hear that you jumped in 2022 going, hey, I might be at the tail end.
Yeah.
It has been a rocket ship for 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And only going to continue to be. Well, Andrew, man, thank you so much for talking a little bit about your report and about the industry with us. It's an exciting time to be in our space. We're grateful for what JLL does in the industry and helping keep us all informed. Thank you for hanging out with me for a little bit and talking a little bit about what the future looks like.
Thanks, Raymond. Appreciate it.